This video is brought to you by LoopCloud, a better way to store and organize your sounds. Go to loopcloud.net to check it out and get a gigabyte of free samples when you sign up. What's up, guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today we're taking a look at a song from my latest EP, Spaceship Joyride, and this song in particular is Solar Flare, which is one of my favorite tracks off the album. So let's kick this off with the drop. And that goes on from there. So let's go ahead and build this up by the layers. And then there's a bunch of other elements that I will go into in a second, but this is kind of the basics of the track. So starting off with some drums, which are kind of strewn all about here. We got a kick. Nothing too fancy there, no real fancy processing, just a little bit of top end boost. Help it cut through a bit. That's a fairly short, punchy kick. Then we got some bass elements, these two right here. This one, kind of a gritty, distorted bass, done in Serum. That's got a little bit of width to it, as you can hear as well. A little upper mids boost here. And as you can see, I have the low end cut out so that I can make room for the sub, which is somewhat distorted sine wave. These both have LFO tool on them, pumping them to keep them out of the way of the kick and get that kind of standard effect. And as you can hear right here, the kick and the basses play pretty well together just by themselves, and that's the thing I always check, is to just solo the bass and the kick to make sure that they're kind of working, because if they're not, everything else kind of falls apart. They're your foundation, so make sure that they actually work well together. And to aid in that fitting together, the kick is tuned to the key of the song, and then it's also fairly short so that the sub of the kick doesn't fight with the actual sub itself. So on top of that, we got a couple of leads. This first lead is a self-made Serum preset, and I'll leave a link in the description to download that for free because, hey, why not? So essentially that's a couple of hyper saws with some unison, some detune going on, and they're an octave apart, and then one of them has the sync turned up to around there. That's approximately where it was. And then, of course, a bunch of glide, and then a noise here. If I get rid of this stuff. And that is pitched, as you can hear, and that gives it some attack. And then layered with that is this other lead. An octave up. And this one is much more kind of spread out, a little more wet in terms of the effects on it. And that's just there to kind of fill out and add a bit of shimmer to the main lead. And the pumping on these, as you can see here, is a little bit less than the pumping on the bass, because the bass needs to get completely out of the way of the kick. That can be a really extreme effect. But with the leads are kind of taking center stage, and so this doesn't go all the way down when the kick hits. And that goes for both leads. On top of that, we got some chords, or under that really. Solo U here. So super basic super saw, 2 layers of super saws with the unison cranked and the detune pushed as far as it could go without sounding bad. And so we got 2 layers an octave apart, and these have no release time, so they just cut out the second they're over. And that is to make room for all these little fills, which I will get to in a second. And then layered with that is providing some mids, and then also tying into the elements in the breakdown, which I will get to after I finish the drop. And these are both pretty quiet to let the lead and the bass take center stage and to keep the mix nice and clear and clean. We got a couple effects over here, this crash, reverse crash here, and a little riser as the drop nears its end. And that snare drum. So let's go into the fills real quick. These are all mostly sampled. So for instance, this guy here. That's a couple different vocal samples pitched up and pitched around to be whatever the notes the leads are playing. A couple of bass plucks. I think the last one's an AU5 growl. And then a couple of serum growls. And both of these serum growls are self-made, and I'll do a video in the future on some more specifics on growls, but to just go into this very quickly, it's got a sub here, a couple of wavetables here. This one has one of the warp modes on it, mirror, and then this other wavetable here is got the unison up just to add some width, and then some filter movement, and then some kind of standard effects. This widens it out, distort it a bit, boost the lows a bit, and then flange it just a little bit. And the other bass is made in a very similar way. And as you can hear, this bass and the vocal chop actually go on top of each other, and there are very few gaps that are not filled by something. A couple of them are when they're the shorter gaps, and that creates that nice contrast with those little beats of silence, but then these longer gaps are all filled in by something. And a lot of figuring out kind of how that flowed was just a lot of trial and error, trying different sounds and such. So then we go into the breakdown, and this is kind of fun because I had been thinking about what are some instruments that are not really used much, what's something I can do to get kind of a unique sound, and there's not a lot of funk in progressive house or big room, at least as far as I've heard, so I thought I could have some fun with the organs and the electric pianos. So those are all layered under these leads, so let me just play it first of all. And that goes on from there. So to build this up real quick. So I'll go into all of those elements individually. Since I mentioned the kind of funk aspect of it first, let me talk about that first. So we got an electric piano here. And a lot of the top line of that kind of interweaves with the main melody. And then for the second half of this breakdown, it switches. And this is all played in on my MIDI keyboard and then quantized. And then under that is the organ. And this is actually filtered in over time. So it starts off, the electric piano is definitely taking center stage, and then over time the organ becomes more apparent, kind of adding that different vibe as time goes on. And the vibe switches once again when the electric piano goes to double time. So that's fun. And then on top of that we got a couple plucks, kind of lead elements. This guy here. This one's definitely the main element, although I didn't like how hollow it sounded, which is why I layered these two. They complement each other nicely, and that's got a bunch of delay on it. And then under that is one of my favorite tricks to increase kind of interest, make things flow better, is a metric crap ton of reversed sounds. And that was done by soaking the synths in reverb selecting the note I wanted, exporting just that note and letting that reverb ring out on that note, and then reversing it and getting rid of the transient. So this right here, didn't keep it, just left that much. And the reverse track itself has a compressor to even it out, and then a little bit of reverb as well, just to help everything flow nicely and stay very fluid. And also subtly on there is an electric piano doubling up the plucks. Another thing I did was to drop the sub back in. So it goes from here. This is a trick I like a lot. It adds a really cool moment when you've had this lack of bass and then suddenly the bass comes back in and it sounds very full. It's a cool effect. And then also I have the filtered main lead slowly coming in, and also just serves to keep this section interesting and keep it increasing in energy over time. And so now it's going full force. And then over here I've got the same kick with a bunch of low end cut out, so I didn't really have to pump anything with it. And on top of that, a snap and a ride. And then a subtle riser bringing us into the build. Little fill there. And so for the build, that's the thing I will finish on. The way I kind of transition this, I kept the electric piano going. Like that, just on one chord. And over time, that does get filtered out, because it's not present in the drop, so I needed a way to kind of get rid of it. So I'm basically transitioning between the elements here and the elements here. The organ does stay in the drop, so I was able to just filter out a bit of the low end to kind of bring it to where it is in the drop, but keep it going just on that one chord. I'll get to that in a second. The lead and plucks stop here, just do one more last note with a bunch of delay and reverb to really just let it fade out nicely. And the sub also gets its low end cut over time. So that way you have no sub, so when the drop hits, the sub kicks back in, and it's very impactful. And finally, you've got your snare build and a bunch of effects. So we've got this sweep up here, which I've faded in. A whoosh to bring us into the build. And an impact as well. And then this element here, which is lots of fun. This is another self-made serum patch, which I'll also link to in the description so you can download it for free. And essentially what this is a couple of saws going down very quickly. Mural, mural, mural. I believe down an octave. Over the first half, that's filtered in, and then in the second half, that's slowly pitched up an octave like this. And then I have the velocity and the rate linked, so essentially the harder the note hits, the faster it goes. So for instance, this guy here is very slow, whereas this guy here is very fast, because the velocity is higher, which is kind of cool. And then finally, the lead sound, just doing one note, and that is also just being pitched up an octave and being filtered in. And all that drops out for the fill. Create that nice moment of silence to really, really build that anticipation for the drop. Then the drop hits again, and I believe I added in one extra lead. Oh, just a subtle little pluck. Cool. And that is it for today. I want to give a huge thank you to Loopmasters for sponsoring this video. Their new software, LoopCloud, is a free way to store and organize your sounds. Any pack you buy from Loopmasters is stored online and tagged, allowing you to access your sounds from any computer and find the exact loop or sample you're looking for quickly and easily. They're also working on features that will allow you to upload and tag your own sounds, and buy individual sounds instead of buying full packs. Go to loopcloud.net to download the software for free and get a gigabyte of free samples when you sign up, plus 150 free samples every week. Once again, thank you so much to Loopmasters for their support of my channel, and I will be back with a new song in a week or two.
Peace!